Welcome back, everybody. This is part two and would be the OP podcast number 7 for backpacking. We're going to continue where we left off last time, just talking a little bit about some hints and some tips for if you decide to go backpacking over this summer, just a little bit about what Campus Rec and Outdoor Pursuits recommends. And today we're going to be talking about the 7 principles of Leave No Trace. I'll introduce all of our panelists again, same as last time. So we have Dave, Brian, and Liza, and everybody's going to share a little bit about what they have to say about Leave No Trace and just some nice little tips and tricks for you to take away, soak away, and enjoy your outdoors over this summer. So, Liza, I'll toss this to you. You can tell us a little bit about what the 7 principles of Leave No Trace are. You're going to be our expert today.
Right on. Thank you, Jordan. All right. So, we're not going to have time to really go in depth with all 7 principles, obviously. Those will be in podcasts to come, but I'll kind of introduce all 7, and then I think we're going to go a little bit more in depth with just the first 2, maybe 3 today. We'll see, we'll see how that goes. But so the first principle is plan ahead and prepare. Second principle is travel on durable surfaces. The third principle is dispose of waste properly. And then you have number 4, which is leave what you find. Number 5, which is minimize campfire impacts. Very important for Colorado. Number 6, respect wildlife. And 7 is be considerate of other visitors. So like I said, there's a whole lot to cover on each of those topics. We'll just kind of start with the plan ahead and prepare. And that can kind of have to do with what gear you bring and what you, especially backpacking, what you're taking with you. So maybe I'll toss that to Dave a little bit and let him, I know he had some thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Let's go a little in depth on this.
So, yeah, plan ahead and prepare, right? You're, as Liza just said, you're going to bring different things on different trips depending on where you're going. And the time of year, the environment, right? A winter backpacking trip is going to look very different than a summer backpacking trip. But even within the same season, a spring backpacking trip in the Olympic National Rainforest outside of Seattle is going to be very different than a spring backpacking trip in the desert of Southern California, right? So got to know what you're going to get into, what you're going to think you're going to see, what to expect, weather phenomenon, things of that nature, altitude, all of that comes into play. So it's important to know what you think you're going to expect. Is it spring? Is it summer? Is it winter? What type of gear do I need to bring? Do I need to bring, heavy-duty down parka or a synthetic parka? But, do I need that if I'm going to go on a summer backpacking trip in Death Valley?
Mm-hmm.
We all kind of laugh, but the answer is still maybe. You need to research. What are the average nighttime temperatures in Death Valley? Right? They could be near freezing, and you might still want that big puffy jacket in August in Death Valley. Maybe. You know what I mean? So it's just the research part of that, and all of that. And then another part of plan ahead and prepare kind of hits every other bullet on that list. So like, what are the regulations for managing my waste? Right?
Yeah.
Do I have to pack it out? Can I bury it? Right? How do I select my campsite? Can I? Is it up to me? Right? So then we talk about backcountry permits versus improved campsite permits, right? Which are different. So I can have a improved campsite permit in Rocky Mountain National Park that all the tents have to be within 4 feet of this pole in the middle of the campsite so that the campsite doesn't just keep growing its footprint, right? So they want everybody really close to this pole in the middle of the thing. Well, that's different than a backcountry permit where it's like you can camp anywhere in the park provided you are 300 feet away from any source of water or trail, right? So know what the regulations are, know what you're going to get into, and just think about all of the other principles when you're planning ahead and preparing.
Yeah, the one that sticks out to me when I think of that is, knowing before you go, doing the research obviously is the main principle right there. But I think about like the animals and the wildlife. I think that's the 6th principle that you're going to kind of come across is really just knowing that too. What kind of wildlife are you going to see? What can you possibly see? We talked about that last time in the podcast about, wearing higher ankled boots, in case you come across rattlesnakes or something like that. That to me is one of the biggest things that sticks out. And I like how you kind of said that the first principle really plays into how all the other principles are. And I mean, do you think that's kind of why it's the first one? Do you think it's more ambiguous to kind of look at, or it's intentional to kind of fit and fall into every other principle afterwards?
Capital I, intentional.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure. And you're right, Jordan. Like, what is the wildlife? Not just respecting it. You know, that principle is kind of getting into not approaching animals, not feeding the
Yeah.
wildlife, right? Things like that. Having a fishing permit if you're going to go fishing, things like that, right? But yeah, it's very different. A backpacking trip in Denali National Forest, right, where there are humongo grizzly bears, is very different than a backpacking trip outside Rocky Mountain National Park, where we might see smaller black bears that are much more subdued and easier to be around. And the regulations that go with that. So, quick, smallest of tidbits here. My dad worked for the United States Geological Survey and would spend a month in Denali every summer. Well, federal employees going on a federally sponsored backpacking trip in a federal national park, right? They were required to carry not only a sidearm, but a high caliber rifle in case they came into bears. So that was a regulation imposed upon them, right, by the organization they're working for. So got to know that stuff too, right?
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead,
I was gonna say, you know, along with that note, while we're just on the subject of animals, and this is not necessarily bears, but you know, people always think, okay, bears, okay, wolves, things that have teeth and claws and they're gonna eat me. But like another thing is like elk rut season. Elks get it's like mating season, right? They get mean. You don't want to be really near an elk anyways, because they can injure you, and if they feel threatened or if they feel like you're encroaching on their territory, they might go after you. But that's another thing to know of, like, okay, is it elk rut season? Am I gonna run into moose on this? Like, even the animals that just have like hooves can be dangerous. You kind of have to prepare and know, like, okay, if I see these animals, where is the safe distance? Where am I too close? What do I do if I am too close? What do I do if they charge me? Like, this is all stuff that's, I think, a great, you know, thing to research and for your own safety, you know, plan ahead. And a lot of times I do think people go, okay, like, I always hear people talking about bringing bear spray and being worried about being in bear country, but like they kind of miss the other animals that could also harm them.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
I would tail in with that, like, know if it's hunting season. Okay, and like maybe don't go backpacking right next to a national wildlife reserve during hunting season. You're going to hear gunshots the whole time, which ruins the last principle of be considerate of other people, and noise and all that type of stuff. But stray bullets, man, and then you got scared animals running out of that reserve into where you're backpacking, scared, could have all sorts of problems. They could be looking for food. That's important, right? There's a really famous national wildlife refuge right outside of the backside of Pikes Peak, for example. So it's just like really cognizant to be aware of, like, that's hunting season. Maybe I don't want to go backpacking right next to that plot of land. When there's
that's an excellent point too. You know, backpacking during hunting season it's just like better avoided.
Yeah.
For sure. And then also like what to do around little critters that will chew their way into your tent and what have you.
Or their van.
Oh gosh.
Or your vehicle.
I've heard that.
Yeah. They can get in, you know, into these spaces where your food is stored and actually damage all of your food. The entire container of food is no longer, you know, trustworthy or safe to eat.
The hantavirus from a little tiny mouse.
Yeah, that hantavirus and stuff.
Well, this one sounds very important, and obviously I think everybody has some great kind of input on this specific topic. When I go out and I think of planning ahead, you know, the very first thing I think of is how long is the hike, or how long is, you know, what I'm doing, you know, and that's participate. So I kind of want to know, when you're, you know, thinking of the first principle, all three of you, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you plan ahead? The very first thing that you think about when planning your hike or your backpacking trip?
Clothing.
Mine is seeing if my dog can come.
Nice.
So important.
That's number one, my first thing, like, okay, can my dog come to this area? yes, okay, now I'll look into the area. No, okay, find somewhere else. That's pretty much my first thing.
Nice. Yeah, mine's clothing. I just, what type of clothes am I going to need for this trip? Is it a rafting trip? Is it a backpacking trip? Is it a long hiking trip? Are we car camping? Are we truly backpacking? And then weather, right? High altitude, desert, very different gear.
Weather's important.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan, what about you?
The first thing that comes to my mind when I think about it is where to go. And that's like, this is a place I'd like to go. And then you sort of can work back from that and discover, really weather probably would be that second factor. Is it a good season to be there? That kind of thing.
Well, I like that. I like all those answers. I think those are very unique, and I think everybody is going to have their own preference or their own thing that they first think about. But kind of moving on to the second principle, which is, travel and camping on durable surfaces. Tell me a little bit about that, because I'm a little bit more of a novice when it comes to that. I think, I'm sleeping on just some kind of like soft pad, getting off the cold ground, and in a sleeping bag. But I'm sure there's more to just picking a spot.
Yeah, I'll start off on that. So the traveling camp on durable surfaces is just essentially either usually, like Dave was talking about, where they want you really close to this one pole. It's so you concentrate, because you're going to have an impact from sleeping on a surface or from walking over it. So they want you to concentrate it on one area, right? Like that's why hiking trails exist, is so everybody stays on the trail, and then everything around it kind of can live and thrive and, or, do its thing. And you're only really just trampling down this one specific spot. And same with, you have the developed campsites where you've got your little square that's already kind of flattened out and smushed, and there's nothing growing there or whatever. So you camp there anyways. And like Dave was talking about, you have to stay real close to this pole, because then if you don't, you trample this vegetation, and then people move out further and they trample that vegetation. And then, all of a sudden you have just kind of this bigger and bigger ring of dead vegetation and stuff like that. But then there's the whole flip side, where if you're traveling in basically untouched wilderness or undeveloped wilderness, that would be, dispersed camping. If you're hiking somewhere where there isn't any hiking trails, I would go more into, that one's a little bit, I don't want to say higher level, but it is a little bit more, you have to be a little more conscious of what you're doing to not create an impact. You have to kind of know what vegetation, okay, I can walk on this and it will grow back. If I walk on this, I'm going to kill it. So that one's a little bit more in depth. But also, if you're just starting out hiking and camping and backpacking, you're probably going to be sticking to areas that are more developed anyways. And developed doesn't necessarily mean super busy. It just means that there are existing trails. So, I don't know. That was kind of a rant, but
no, I think that's
good
right
information.
Yeah, it's right on. And I was going to tail in a little bit on it. Most of our experience, other than on these improved trails like Rocky Mountain National Park and National Forest and what have you, is in and around the Moab area. So the desert's pretty straightforward, pretty simple, related to what you said. There you really do want to avoid the soft surfaces, and you travel as much as you can on what ultimately is solid sandstone. You definitely leave no trace there. And then we even go to some lengths of walking a long distance around to avoid trampling the cryptobiotic soil there, the black dirt, as we like to call it sometimes, because it takes a long time to recover. And then or walking in drainages, and even tiny, almost imperceptible little creek beds that are dry almost all year long make for an excellent option there as well. And then sort of as a last resort, if you do cross a little patch of the cryptobiotic soil, you do it in the shortest possible spot. And then you everyone steps in the first person's footprints.
Follow the leader.
Yeah. So it's pretty fun to actually do what you can to really stay out of the those sensitive areas.
Absolutely. The part that I'd add to this conversation is I kind of see it like kind of threefold. So there's like this environmental stewardship part to travel and camping on durable surfaces, for all the reasons that Liza talked about, right? Um, and then there's kind of the last bullet there on like being considerate of other people. So like I went backpacking to go experience a pristine environment, right? And I go out to the desert there, and I see these massive footprints just like crunching all this cryptobiotic soil going out into the desert. That's going to have an impact on my experience, you know what I mean? Just seeing that other people have been there, for sure. And then gamify it. Make it a game, like Brian was saying. Like literally, okay, we got to go from here to there. The safest thing that we're going to be able to do here, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave some footprints, but walk in my footprints. So that we're only leaving one set, not 12 sets, right?
Yeah.
Another thing that you'll see here is to help protect the land in these really undeveloped areas is you don't follow each other. You literally spread out into a meadow to spread your impact across that whole meadow rather than 24 footsteps of 12 people, right? So things like that. And then the last thing I want to talk about with the camp part of this, right, is durable surfaces, yes, but also just safe ones. So like, don't put your campsite in the middle of a big drainage, because then it rains real hard that night and your campsite gets floated out. Been there, done that. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Okay. Just things happen. We had to camp right there, right? And then absolutely, how people camp and the impact they have on a campsite goes back again to being considerate of other people. So I had this pristine hike. It was gorgeous all day. I get to a campsite. It's trashed out. The fire ring is still there with half-burnt wood in it. And I just see evidence that like this site is growing and growing and growing. That might take me out of that environment as well. And then of course, safety. So like durable surfaces so you don't lose your footing. That's also just a small part of this too, right?
Your lake behind me kind of reminds me of a part mentioned in this is it's you're camping at least 200 feet away from lakes and streams. Yeah. You mentioned the drainage part. Obviously, I think that makes a lot of sense. But is there more to that? Maybe like you don't want to have the possibility of bugs, or is it other wildlife potentially coming to that area?
That's the one.
Okay.
You could prevent an elk from getting water at that pond because you're close to it. They could smell you, all of those things, right? But yeah, there's also more bugs closer to the water, so get away from the bugs, right?
Mind. And gosh, man.
Absolutely. And then, I mean, do you want to put a camp right there on that, like, boggy grass right next to the water? Like, probably not. Like, that's not going to be the best.
Makes a lot of sense.
So yeah, it's all of those factors, man, for sure. And then the last tip that I have for choosing a campsite is look at the trees around you. There's a thing called widowmakers when you're choosing a campsite, right? So like just the picture right here of Liza's background, right? Let's say, I pop my tent down right there and one of those trees is dead and then it gets really windy and that tree comes tumbling onto my tent in the middle of the night. So just check your surroundings too, right? Make sure there's no trees that are going to fall on you.
Oh gosh, I just get a little nightmares thinking about that now.
Yeah, it's really important. We would tell our campers when we're hiking down a trail, right? Like, okay, the trail is like, this wide. And we're going to come across some puddles of water. You're not going to walk around that puddle because now you're going to spread the impact and widen that trail. You're going to hike right through that puddle. You got waterproof boots on. We're backpacking, right? So you don't go around puddles of water in a trail, for example. That's another environmental piece. Whew, that was a lot.
Thanks for sharing that, Dave. I appreciate that. It's all really good info.
No, I think, and Dave kind of, hit the nail on the head with that. There is a lot of just, that is one of the big things of just where like we were talking about last podcast of like get good hiking boots because you need to walk through those puddles of water that to avoid kind of making this big loop around the puddle of water and then all of a sudden the trail is twice as wide as it's supposed to be in one spot. And not only is it, destroying the vegetation, but it's less aesthetically pleasing for anybody hiking on it, and you can just kind of see that impact of these things building. And I also liked how the idea of the cryptobiotic soils kind of tails into the first principle of planning ahead and preparing, because you need to know, okay, is this a thing that is going to be where I'm going to be hiking? This, that's not generally something you'd see in Rocky Mountain National Park, or you do see it in the desert areas in Utah, in Moab, stuff like that. So that's kind of, you need to be aware of the ecology of where you're going.
Right. And to flip my previous statement on its head, when you're in a desert environment, you are camping in washes, because that's where you're going to have the least impact, right? Because next time it rains, all of the traces of you being there will wash away, right? But you're in the desert, so you're not expecting to get flooded out that night. So it's kind of a trade-off there. But yeah, plan ahead. That's why you prepare. It's why you research where you're going, right?
I'm really appreciative of y'all's kind of respect towards, preserving, the ecosystem, the trails, the vegetation, and everything right there. I mean, obviously that's a very important part, and I think that really segues into the third part that we have, or at least the third principle that we're going to get to, and just disposing of waste properly. And so obviously that has a huge impact. If you leave stuff there, if you leave trash or even food or things like that, it can definitely have an impact on the environment, and obviously the natural biological processes that we have to do. So Liza, tell me why pack it in and pack it out is so important, and why it's the third one on our list.
Really quick before you go, Liza, do note that the principle doesn't say human waste. It says waste.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because you like to bring your dog with you.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I often carry out far too many poop bags than most people ever want. But it could be worse. So pack it in, pack it out. I think we're gonna. I guess we'll touch on this, but we're also gonna get more into poop because why not?
It's part of it.
But yeah, it's exactly that. It's not having an impact on the local ecology. It's not leaving behind trash. It's making it so these places can remain beautiful for other people, or next time you visit it, or if you visit a park and then every person who visits that park for the next year leaves behind a piece of trash, and you come back a year later, you're essentially going to a landfill. There's so many people who visit these parks, and there's no benefit to leaving trash behind. There's a million reasons not to do it, and no reasons to do it, really. But then it also comes with stuff like, I know we've had this kind of talk a bit about, natural things, about banana peels, orange peels, nut shells of any sort. And that's also kind of, orange peels and banana peels take a really long time to decompose just sitting out there in the wilderness. I have a compost pile, and they'll decompose in 2 months, but that's not the same as just sitting out in an alpine environment or something like that. It takes forever, and it's not, there's no banana trees around, so it's obviously it doesn't belong there. And it can also it can affect the wildlife. They'll start smelling it and associate people with food, and that can lead to aggressive actions from wildlife. So it's this whole big issue, leaving behind not just the plastic that you'd think, okay, obviously I'm not leaving that behind, but then it's the little stuff. It's the the little corners of the wrappers that might fall out of your pocket. You got to keep an eye on that so it doesn't just end up piling up. And then the last part, of course, like I said, it says dispose of waste in general. It doesn't say human waste or dog waste, but human waste and dog waste are both important parts of that, right? So dog poop, I would just pack it out. That's what I do. I mean, I suppose maybe somebody's looked into digging a cat hole for your dog. I've never heard of anybody doing that. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's some dedication.
Yeah. And you got to get your dog to aim really well, right? You got to
I was gonna say, you just wait for him to take a spot and just sneak up behind and dig a hole.
Dig the hole. Yeah.
And I have heard that with the foods that dogs eat, that their droppings are worse than human droppings in many ways in the outdoors. So the cat. I think the packing out is the only real option.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's
Right.
as far as I know, the only option.
Yeah.
And then mine comes back to that people part too. I just spent 8 hours hiking through pristine country, and I get to this campsite, and there's like 4 doggy poop bags just sitting there. Like, that's gonna have an impact on my experience, right? Or same thing, I come in and there's orange peels all around the campsite. Like that's gonna impact my experience, right?
So yes, for sure. And on a personal note that I'll share right now, I actually I didn't write an oath down, but I took an oath that I wouldn't allow these dog dropping bags to ruin my hike. I have to remind myself, this is now so common, it's so prevalent everywhere that if that affects me negatively, then it detracts from every single hike I ever go on. So now I have a new mantra, which is to not allow that. And it's brand new to me. I'm just working on it.
I need to adopt
I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah.
So wait. I always go on hikes and I always see these little dog bags of poo right now next to it. That's like just people being lazy and not taking it out. It's not.
That's only doing half, maybe not even half, but only part of the job.
Yeah.
So it really is about the second half of taking it home and throwing it away.
Right.
It's the most
said
important part.
It's so crazy because you said it's become kind of a common thing now. Every hike I go on, I see at least 4 or 5. And I'm thinking like this is like a natural protocol now that you're supposed to do. You put it on the side of the road or not the side of the road, but the side of the trail, and it decomposes somehow in the bag. There's a special, ranger that comes and picks it up. So this is actually like just people being lazy.
Yeah.
So, and I will make the statement that I know I've seen people, their intent is, okay, I'm hiking, I'm on my way out, I'll drop it here, I'll go out, and I'll come back. But a lot of times people do intend to come back and get it, but the problem is either because, grossly enough, there's definitely certain rodents and mammals that like poop. Mm-hmm. So they'll tear the bag open, they'll take the poop, or they'll try to run off with it, whatever. But then the other thing that I've seen people do is not realize they're on a loop hike. So they will leave the bag and then not come back the same way.
Yeah.
So yes, to anybody watching, just take it with you.
Just take it with you.
It's not great, but take it with you.
Yeah.
Double bag it, triple bag it.
If anybody has any value, it takes away any value from this presentation, it would be to take your pet's poops home with you.
Yeah. Mine's a little more personal. If you're camping, just so you know, aluminum cans don't go away in a campfire. They don't burn and evaporate. Mm-hmm. Take your metal cans with you because those stay there in a fire pit. That's one thing that irks me, man.
Thank you for bringing that up in general, because that is part of the dispose of waste properly principle. Do not burn it. Do not burn it. It releases toxic chemicals. Mm-hmm. It doesn't go away. You might start a forest fire. Do not burn your trash. Just take it with you. Even food, don't burn it.
So
yeah,
I do want to talk about the scenarios where you can bury your poo, because that's been a thing for a long time. Right, that you dig a cat hole and you do your business in there, and then you cover the cat hole. And there are certain environments and situations where that's totally acceptable, but they're a little trickier than people would think. It's not just the presence of dirt, right? But it's the presence of like living dirt, right? Not just a pile of dirt in a construction yard that has no growth in it, right? But the dirt, again, like behind Liza's backdrop, right? Like that dirt's like alive, right? There's microorganisms in there that help break things down and decompose stuff.
Yeah.
And so one of the principle here is, if you're going to dig a cat hole to bury your waste, you need to get it into that decomposition layer of the soil. The general prevailing thought is 6 to 8 inches down, right? Of course, that's going to depend on a lot of factors, but that's just a good way that the LNT principle can be applied. 6 to 8 inch hole, right? Dig it down. It gets you into that living soil area. Put your stuff in there, and the earth is going to break that down. It's just tricky to do, right? And it's just kind of easier just to kind of pack it up, right? In a sense, for sure. And then I totally echo, like, a lot of people used to do the cat hole, do their business in the cat hole, and then, like, light the paper on fire, right? Because I thought, like, it would take longer to decompose in this hole and light it on fire. it just opens the door to all sorts of other problems, right? Everything that Liza said. So yeah, stay away from burning that paper in that hole and stuff like that.
These are all great lessons. I really appreciate the input you guys have to say. I mean, every time I do these podcasts, I know I'm kind of honest, but I always learn something from it.
Nice.
And I'm really glad that like I don't have to learn the hard way, by making a mistake or getting a fine or burning down half of a forest. So I think sometimes the best teachers can be the hard lessons we have to learn. And so we're kind of nearing the end. We've kind of really blown through these 3 principles right here, but based off of what we talked about, I want to know what are 3 things, that you've all had to learn the hard way towards backpacking and that deals with these 3 principles right here.
I'll start with one. My first lesson that I learned when it comes to planning ahead and preparing, you should get information from official land managers, but also look towards social media trends, right? So I went on a backpacking trip, and actually from this picture, now, okay, we go over the pass, we come down, it'll be like 12 or 13 mile hike or something. And then there's this campsite, which is like 3 miles away from the road, from, parking that people can hike 3 miles into. And I'm thinking, it's kind of in an obscure location. It's going to be fine. Nobody's going to be there. It's off season, whatever. I get within about a mile of the campsite, and I just keep seeing people coming up and going, nope, campsite's full, don't go down there. I was like, okay, maybe they're just whatever. I run into a ranger, and he's like, yeah, luckily there was dispersed camping, but he was like, you should probably head the other way and try to find some dispersed camping, because I've already had to kick people out for doubling up and, camping illegally in that area. So you might as well just try to find something dispersed. Come to find out, there is this lone peak that's right below this water feature that's really pretty. Somebody posted it on social media like 6 years ago or something. And now everybody goes to that campsite to see that peak. I had no clue about that. I was just going off of, Forest Service, what was open, blah, 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 going through all the very official websites. And I almost, ended up having to do a whole 12-mile hike or getting a really expensive Uber out of basically the middle of nowhere. So check multiple sources, check the officials, but also see, if it says, okay, there's this, it pops up all over the place on social media, this place I'm going to camp, so maybe I should find a different campsite or have a backup plan or whatever.
Check local events, right? I mean, the last thing you'd want is to plan a big backpacking trip in the Moab area, and middle of your backpacking trip, your camp gets invaded by literally 10,000 Jeeps because it's Jeep week.
Yeah.
I mean, just a 10-mile train of Jeeps traveling through the pristine backcountry because it's Jeep week. So, like, super crucial. That's awesome, Liza. Like, know what's going on in that area. Is there a big event happening?
I like that a lot. I appreciate kind of the insight. It's an interesting, hard lesson to learn. But I mean, nonetheless, I mean, you gathered that skill and moved forward with it. Brian, what about you? I'm sure you got some knowledge up there.
Yeah. It's sort of, there's plenty of little hard knocks, and I'll give some more thought to that and look forward to sharing some more of those too. But for now, I have one, which is really just the lesson that you cannot be prepared for every eventuality.
Yeah.
So my message would be, is don't let that idea stop you. Rather than that, plan around the things that you can't be prepared for and avoid them, so that your agenda doesn't include exposure to things for which no group can be truly prepared. That's a complete misnomer. When you see advertising, I just saw advertisement that was custom posted via email to me that said, be prepared for every situation. And right away, of course, I was like, that's impossible.
How?
We know there's a major hospital not far from here, and they're not a level 1 trauma center. so they're not prepared for every eventuality, and they have tremendous resources at their disposal there. But they take people and they send them to another resource because it's impossible to be prepared. So that's a misnomer, and I think it does get in the way of enjoyment of the outdoors for a lot of us, including myself sometimes, for sure.
Yeah.
Good ones. I like it. Dave, what you got for us?
Oh, one lesson, 3 parts. And it's gonna come off as a joke, but it's actually really serious. Fire is hot, water's wet, rocks are hard. It sounds funny, but this was feedback that I got from one of my 10-year-old backpackers after 6 weeks of backpacking. Right? He's like, "What'd you learn?" He's like, "Fire's hot, water's wet, rocks are hard." Explain more. What do you mean? He's like, "Well, don't play with fire. Like it's not a toy. I mean, like there was one night where they were doing coal juggling, which is a thing. You just juggle coals, right? But like, yeah, good way to get burned. Good way to get blisters on your hand, right? So had a conversation about that. Water's wet, so like your feet are gonna get wet. Your shoes are gonna get wet. Have extra socks with you so you can put some dry socks back on, right? Something like that. So that was a lesson learned. And rocks are hard, so watch your footing, right? Slipping and banging your knee just because you missed your footing, right? Or worse, right? Breaking something because you fell on a hard surface is a lesson. So I'll bring that back to myself. I've done all 3. I've burned myself playing with coals. I did not bring enough sock wear when I was in the temperate rainforest of the Olympic National Rainforest and had soggy feet the whole time because water is wet, right? And I have definitely taken many diggers and bruised and banged myself up on hard rocks, slipping and stuff like that. So